Daily Mail's approach was to make dramatic, personalised news appeal to a global English audience. And The Guardian set out, in its words, to be the world's liberal voice. The New York Times view of its own impartiality would of course reject the idea that it dresses the world from any particular perspective, and it certainly retains strong international news gathering to allow it to report from multiple perspectives. However, its readership, both print and online, is still overwhelmingly US dominated, whereas only a small proportion of the BBC's total news audience comes from the United Kingdom. So how do the BBC's efforts to produce journalism that is from the world and to the world compare to that competition? Our efforts to produce journalism that is relevant for as large a proportion of the world as possible are not new, but the model that we are using is changing rapidly. A little bit of history. The BBC's global English service, then called the Empire Service, was founded in 1932. Then in 1938, our first language services were started. But the language broadcasting of news was not then built on reporting from those countries or reflective of those countries we were broadcasting to. Instead, the editorial process was a centralised one, where news bulletins and features were written in English and then faithfully translated and broadcast by announcers. It was a world service, but it was a service to the world, not from the world. 20 years ago, an internal revolution took place. The BBC expected its language teams increasingly to recruit real journalists and asked them to find and report their own stories, as well as translating the international stories from the English newsroom. At the BBC, we believe, as a result of that, we now have an unrivalled internal network to be able to gather and retell those global stories. Now, by making sure we have the right skills, the right languages, and crucially, the right culture to ensure we share our knowledge, we are creating a global network, a combination of the great English news gathering operation, enhanced by the contribution of our language services and the journalists, where stories from all our teams come from all corners of the globe and are part of a uniquely diverse mix of stories. But we can't do this any longer just within our own walls. Our network needs to be with our audiences, and we also need to network with partner news organisations. We can no longer be a BBC fortress or castle. That requires some dramatic changes in our mindset. We need to change to serve our audiences better, and of course because we can no longer afford not to. That change will be best shown in the new BBC News Centre in central London that we will move into in less than 12 months' time. New Broadcasting House, as it's called, is attached to the BBC's historic domestic radio headquarters in central London. It will house the largest broadcast and online news operation in the world, home to around 2,000 journalists. And for the first time, the BBC's greatest dual strength, which I mentioned before, its UK news operation and its international news operation, will come together under one roof. But we won't just be sticking those two teams together and leaving things as they are. Instead, we're working on plans to blend those teams and to get the best from them. So experts and programme makers in areas like the arts, science or business will all sit together, working on breaking news as well as in-depth documentary. They'll be able to share their knowledge, and we will ensure that the best editorial talent has the widest range of outlets to broadcast and publish to. And our newsroom will be full of a mix of talent from around the world. That is what becoming more global is all about. For instance, this year we're creating a pioneering video production unit, which will be staffed by producers from many languages. They will create the best stories from around the world and make videos in their own language and in English. And that material will then be, in turn, adapted and translated by their colleagues. That way the very best stories will be seen not just in one language or just in English, but in all of our languages and be available to everyone. And of course it will work both ways. Material produced for English-speaking audiences will be rapidly adapted for use in many languages. This new way of working, which we believe will be really exciting, is likely to prove a model for how much of our global news is produced in this new headquarters. Not only will it be cost effective, but much more importantly, it will mean that our agenda, which already tries to be truly global and even-handed, will be driven further by this multinational, multilingual approach. But some people might ask, is an attempt to achieve a truly international news agenda a naive one, particularly at a time when competitors are providing news that is more tailored or more slanted to a particular viewpoint? And in the age of the internet, is there any need for a news organisation to try to do what the internet itself can do? That is, to be both the source and the distributor of news. Now, there's no doubt that the internet, whatever the debates about how it undermines business models, is brilliantly conceived for news. It's naturally open to free information and perspective, which are the lifeblood of news. And the BBC certainly doesn't see the internet as a competitor. Instead, we plan to exploit its every advantage and make sure that we respond to its challenges. The great potential of the internet lies in its global scale, in information and in viewpoint. But in our view, that also creates, to some extent, a weakness. While you can obtain a truly global viewpoint from the web, most of us don't have the time to search out all that information or the range of perspectives. Indeed, there's a lot of evidence that news sources and opinions that people seek are narrowing down as users focus instead on quick, easy headlines and or views that fit their own preconceptions, their prior views. In the drawbacks of internet-based news, the BBC sees an opportunity. By using our internal network of journalists and partnering with our audiences in providing us with their rich information, we believe we can blend together our original journalism with the best information that's out there. And by doing that, we can provide what we've always aspired to, the most accurate and authoritative account of global events. In an era of very many voices and very many views on the web and on airwaves, is the BBC's belief in impartiality, in lack of bias, a concept almost of floating above the world in an attempt to have no viewpoint at all. Is that view of impartiality now outdated or just philosophically impossible? Now, the achievement of absolute impartiality may be very hard indeed, but the attempt to get to it, to approach it, still motivates us as an organisation and still brings us vast audiences. Now, of course, some audiences do want news from particular perspectives, and we respect that. But as global citizens, and I suspect there are many people who would think of themselves as global citizens in this room today, as a global citizen, why would you just inform yourself with one view on a story? The ability of professional, non-biased news organisations to bring a range of views to bear and place them in front of audiences in a fair way is still valued by our audiences, and we believe it's an essential complement to the cacophony, the noise of the internet. The world is becoming more global as the economy, climate and technology bring us all into greater interdependence, that connectedness of the world. But much of our journalism, international journalism, due to budget cuts, is becoming less global as the need for journalism to be more global increases. Therefore, we should applaud all news organisations that are struggling to remain as global as possible. But for our part, the BBC will try to become more global, serving the needs of that globalised audience. So in the offices, the newsrooms and the cafes of the new BBC News headquarters, there will be a multitude of faces and languages from all over the globe. Those people, that great talent, will be better placed than ever before to contribute to setting the BBC's news agenda. Within our walls and outside it, we want to create a network that that respects all views, that tests all information, and that always tries to tell the world the way it is. We know we don't always get that right, but that aspiration motivates thousands of the BBC's journalists, whether they come from Manchester or from Mumbai. We'll be blending those teams together, delivering on our mantra and our vision of becoming more global. We think it'll be one of the greatest experiments in international journalism that London, and possibly the world, has ever seen. We'll be opening our doors in a year's time. I hope that all news organisations and members of the global public who've got a passion for reporting the world as independently as possible will come to see us and see how we're doing. And I'm sure our audiences will let us know whether it works. Thank you very much indeed.